In the gentle hush of a summer morning, the seaside town of Brighton awoke to the promise of another day. The year was 1875, and the Victorian era was in full bloom, a time of invention, propriety, and a curious fascination with the boundaries of public and private life. Along the pebbled shores of the English Channel, the air was tinged with salt, and the faint aroma of seaweed, mingling with the distant laughter of children and the rhythmic clatter of carriage wheels on cobblestone streets. The Victorian seaside was a world apart, a place where the rigid structures of society softened ever so slightly beneath the sun's warm gaze. Here the upper and middle classes sought respite from the smoke and clamour of London and other bustling cities. They arrived in droves, their trunks packed with ruffled dresses, straw bonnets, parasols, and the latest in modest swimwear. For many, the seaside was not merely a destination, but a ritual, a prescribed tonic for health, recommended by doctors who extolled the virtues of sea air and saltwater bathing. As the sun climbed higher, the promenade began to fill with a parade of humanity. Ladies in voluminous skirts and gentlemen in top hats strolled arm in arm, pausing to admire the view or greet acquaintances with polite bows. Children darted between their elders, their laughter rising above the steady murmur of conversation. Vendors hawked their wares, shells, sweets, and painted fans, while artists set up their easels to capture the ever-changing light on the water. Yet, beneath this veneer of leisure, the Victorian seaside was governed by an intricate web of social rules. Modesty was paramount, especially for women whose every movement was scrutinized for propriety. Bathing in the sea, though widely regarded as beneficial, posed a particular challenge. The idea of a woman appearing in public in anything less than full dress was unthinkable. Even the act of changing into a bathing costume required careful orchestration to avoid scandal. Enter the bathing machine, a peculiar contraption that would become an iconic symbol of the era. These wooden huts on wheels lined the shore like a fleet of miniature houses, each one ready to be rolled into the surf at a moment's notice. For a modest fee, a bather could step inside, change in privacy, and emerge directly into the sea, shielded from prying eyes by the walls of the machine and the churning waves beyond. It was in this setting that our story unfolds, amidst the sun-dappled sands and the ceaseless whisper of the tide. The seaside resort was a microcosm of Victorian society, a place where the old rules were both enforced and, in subtle ways, subverted. Here the boundaries of class and gender were both visible and occasionally blurred by the shared pursuit of health and pleasure. On this particular morning, the sky was a pale, cloudless blue, and the sea shimmered with promise. The town's grand hotels and boarding houses bustled with activity as guests prepared for the day ahead. Breakfast rooms echoed with the clink of china and the murmur of polite conversation. Outside, the beach was already coming alive. Attendants in crisp uniforms swept the promenade, while porters wheeled trunks and parasols to rented cabanas. Among the early risers was Eleanor, a young woman of 20 summers, whose family had travelled from London for the season. She stood at her window, gazing out at the expanse of sea and sky, her heart fluttering with anticipation. Today, she would try something she had never done before. She would bathe in the sea, not from the safety of the shore, but from within one of the mysterious bathing machines she had so often watched from afar. Eleanor's mind wandered as she dressed for breakfast, recalling the stories she had heard from other ladies at the hotel. Some spoke of the invigorating chill of the water, others of the awkwardness of changing in such a confined space. There were tales of mishaps, machines stuck in the sand or doors that refused to close, but also of exhilaration of the pure freedom of floating in the open sea, if only for a few moments. Downstairs, the dining room was abuzz with talk of the day's weather and the latest news from London. Eleanor's mother, ever the picture of decorum, reminded her daughter to mind her manners and not to linger too long in the sun. Her father, a man of scientific inclination, extolled the health benefits of sea bathing, quoting the latest medical journals with enthusiasm. "It is the very essence of vitality, my dear," he declared, buttering his toast with precision. "The salt air, the bracing water, it is nature's own remedy." After breakfast, the family made their way to the beach, joining the steady stream of holiday makers who filled the promenade. Eleanor's younger brother raced ahead, eager to collect shells and perhaps glimpse a crab or two beneath the rocks. Her mother walked with measured grace, parasol in hand, while her father paused frequently to examine the curious machinery that lined the shore. The bathing machines themselves were a sight to behold. Painted in cheerful colors, sky blue, butter yellow, seafoam green, they stood in neat rows, each one bearing a number and the name of its proprietor. Some were drawn by sturdy horses, their manes braided with ribbons, while others were pushed by attendants known as dippers, whose job it was to ensure the safe transit of bathers from land to sea and back again. Eleanor watched as a lady in a striped bathing costume disappeared into one of the machines, the door closing behind her with a decisive click. Moments later, the machine was wheeled into the surf, its wheels creaking as it entered the water. When it came to a halt, the back door swung open and the lady stepped out into the waves, her modesty preserved by a canvas awning and the swirling foam. It all seemed both thrilling and faintly absurd, a dance of decorum and daring played out against the backdrop of the endless sea. Eleanor felt a shiver of excitement. Soon it would be her turn. As the morning wore on, the beach grew busier. Groups of ladies gathered beneath striped umbrellas, fanning themselves and exchanging gossip. Children built elaborate sand castles, their laughter mingling with the cries of gulls overhead. Gentlemen strolled along the water's edge, their trousers rolled up, discussing politics and the latest inventions. Yet, for all its bustle, the seaside retained an air of tranquility. The rhythm of the waves, the distant tolling of a church bell, the soft murmur of voices all combined to create a sense of timelessness, as if the world beyond the shore had faded into irrelevance. For many Victorians, the seaside was a place of transformation. Here, away from the constraints of city life, they could breathe more freely, shed their cares, and, for a brief time, become someone else. The bathing machine, with its promise of privacy and adventure, was both a symbol of this transformation and a reminder of the boundaries that still held sway. As Eleanor stood at the water's edge, her toes curling in the cool sand, she felt a surge of possibility. The sea beckoned vast and unknowable, its surface sparkling in the morning light. The bathing machines waited their doors open to those brave enough to step inside. And so, with a mixture of nerves and excitement, Eleanor prepared to embark on her own Victorian seaside adventure, one that would test the limits of her courage, her curiosity, and her sense of self. The story of the Victorian bathing machine begins not with a single inventor, but with a growing cultural tension that simmered beneath the surface of polite society for decades, before finally finding its peculiar solution. In the early 1700s, The English seaside was not yet the bustling, fashionable destination it would become. The coast was wild, windswept, and to many both alluring and intimidating. Yet, as the Enlightenment dawned and the age of reason took hold, new ideas about health and the human body began to circulate. Doctors and philosophers extolled the virtues of cold water immersion, claiming that the bracing sea could cure everything from melancholy to gout. Pamphlets, treatises, and personal letters spread tales of miraculous recoveries, and soon the well-to-do began to flock to the shore in search of the sea's mysterious powers. But there was a problem. How could one enjoy the healthful benefits of bathing in the sea without violating the strict codes of modesty that governed every aspect of public life? In those days, the very idea of exposing one's limbs to public view was scandalous, especially for women. Even men, though less constrained by the rules of fashion, were expected to maintain a certain decorum. The solution, when it came, was as ingenious as it was eccentric: the bathing machine. The earliest known bathing machines appeared in Scarborough, Yorkshire, around 1750. These primitive huts were little more than wooden boxes on wheels, but they represented a revolution in seaside leisure. The concept was simple. A bather would enter the machine on the beach, change into a bathing costume, and then be wheeled either by horse or by human power into the surf. Once safely in the water, the bather could descend a small set of steps or a ramp and immerse themselves in the sea, shielded from prying eyes by the walls of the machine and often a canvas awning that unfurled over the rear entrance. The machines were initially met with curiosity and a fair amount of skepticism. Some saw them as unnecessary contrivances, while others hailed them as the saviors of public decency. As word of their effectiveness spread, however, bathing machines began to appear at resorts up and down the English coast, from the rugged cliffs of Cornwall to the sandy beaches of Kent. By the time Eleanor and her family arrived in Brighton, the bathing machine had become an essential feature of every respectable seaside resort. The machines themselves had evolved considerably from their humble beginnings. No longer simple boxes, they were now sturdy structures often painted in cheerful colours and adorned with decorative trim. Each machine bore the name of its proprietor, and some even boasted whimsical titles: the Neptune, the Sea Nymph, the Mermaid's Retreat. Inside the machines were designed with comfort and privacy in mind. A wooden bench ran along one wall, providing a place to sit while changing. Hooks and pegs offered space for clothing, and a small mirror allowed for last-minute adjustments to one's appearance. The floor was often lined with straw mats to keep feet dry, and the walls were thick enough to muffle the sounds of the bustling beach outside. The rise of the bathing machine was inextricably linked to the social mores of the Victorian era. Modesty was more than a personal virtue. It was a public expectation enforced by a complex web of rules and conventions. For women in particular, the pressure to conform was immense. Their clothing was designed to conceal the body at all costs, with layers of petticoats, corsets, and high-necked blouses. Even at the beach, these standards held firm. The bathing costume itself was a marvel of Victorian engineering. Made of heavy wool or cotton, it covered the body from neck to knee, often with puffed sleeves and a modest skirt. Some included bloomers or trousers underneath for additional coverage. The fabric was designed to maintain its shape even when wet, though this often made the garments uncomfortably heavy once immersed in seawater. The business of bathing machines quickly became a lucrative enterprise. Entrepreneurs recognized the potential profit in catering to the growing demand for seaside recreation while maintaining social propriety. Machine proprietors charged fees based on the duration of use and the quality of the service provided. Premium machines offered additional amenities such as cushioned seating, better ventilation, and more elaborate changing facilities. The operation of a bathing machine required considerable skill and coordination. The attendants, known as dippers, were typically strong individuals capable of maneuvering the heavy wooden structures across sand and into surf. They needed to judge the tides, assess the safety of the water conditions, and ensure that their charges entered and exited the sea without incident. Many dippers developed loyal followings among regular bathers who appreciated their expertise and discretion. The horses used to pull the larger machines were specially trained for beach work. They had to be comfortable with the sound of waves, the feel of sand beneath their hooves, and the occasional splash of salt water. Some proprietors took great pride in their animals, decorating them with ribbons and bells that jingled merrily as they made their way to and from the water. The design of bathing machines varied considerably from one resort to another. Some featured elaborate Victorian Gothic architecture with pointed roofs and decorative woodwork. Others adopted a more utilitarian approach, focusing on functionality over aesthetics. The size of the machines also differed, with some designed for individual use, while others could accommodate entire families. Innovation was constant in the bathing machine industry. Inventors patented improvements such as better wheel designs for easier movement across sand, more efficient drainage systems to prevent water accumulation inside the machines, and enhanced privacy features including adjustable awnings and screens. Some machines even incorporated primitive heating systems to warm bathers before and after their sea immersion. The social hierarchy of Victorian society was reflected in the bathing machine business. The finest machines, with the best locations and most experienced attendants, were reserved for the wealthy and titled. Middle-class families made do with more modest accommodations, while the working classes often had to content themselves with shared facilities or less convenient time slots. The bathing machine also played a role in the emerging women's rights movement. For many Victorian women, the experience of sea bathing represented one of the few opportunities for physical freedom and bodily autonomy. Within the confines of the machine, they could temporarily escape the restrictive clothing and social expectations that governed their daily lives. Some feminist writers of the era praised the bathing machine as a symbol of women's right to health and recreation. Medical professionals of the time were enthusiastic supporters of sea bathing and, by extension, bathing machines. They prescribed specific regimens involving water temperature, duration of immersion, and frequency of treatment. Some doctors even established practices near popular seaside resorts to oversee their patients' bathing routines personally. The cultural impact of bathing machines extended beyond their practical function. They appeared in literature, art, and popular culture as symbols of both Victorian propriety and the era's peculiar relationship with the human body. Satirical cartoons often depicted the amusing situations that could arise from bathing machine mishaps, while romantic novels used them as settings for clandestine meetings and dramatic revelations. As the Victorian era progressed, bathing machines became increasingly sophisticated. Some featured multiple compartments for different family members, while others included small sitting areas where non-bathers could wait comfortably. The most luxurious machines offered refreshments, reading materials, and even small libraries for the entertainment of their occupants. The international influence of the British bathing machine was considerable. Similar contraptions appeared at seaside resorts across Europe and in British colonies around the world. Each culture adapted the basic concept to local conditions and social norms, creating a diverse family of bathing vehicles that shared the common goal of preserving modesty while enabling sea bathing. The maintenance of bathing machines was a constant concern for their operators. The combination of saltwater sand and constant use took a heavy toll on the wooden structures. Regular painting repairs and replacement of worn components were necessary to keep the machines in safe operating condition. Some proprietors employed full-time carpenters and painters to maintain their fleets. The seasonal nature of the bathing machine business created unique economic challenges. Operators had to generate enough revenue during the summer months to sustain themselves through the off-season. Many diversified their operations using their machines for other purposes during the winter, or relocating to warmer climates where year-round operation was possible. The bathing machine industry also fostered innovation in related fields. Manufacturers developed specialized wheels designed for beach use, waterproof fabrics for awnings and curtains, and improved hardware that could withstand the corrosive effects of salt water. These innovations often found applications in other industries, contributing to the broader technological progress of the Victorian era. As Eleanor stood on the Brighton beach, watching the colourful parade of bathing machines making their way to and from the sea, she was witnessing the culmination of decades of social evolution and technological development. The humble wooden huts represented far more than simple convenience. They embodied the Victorian genius for finding practical solutions to complex social problems while maintaining the delicate balance between progress and propriety that defined the age. The invention of the bathing machine was in many ways a perfect metaphor for Victorian society itself, ingenious yet constrained, progressive yet traditional, practical yet absurd. It solved a problem that perhaps should not have existed while creating new possibilities for pleasure and health that might otherwise have remained forever out of reach. The Victorian era's approach to sea bathing was governed by an intricate system of social etiquette that regulated every aspect of the experience, from the appropriate time of day to the proper manner of dress and behavior. These customs were not merely suggestions, but rigid rules that determined who could bathe, when they could do so, and how they must conduct themselves while enjoying the supposed health benefits of the sea. The segregation of the sexes was perhaps the most fundamental principle governing Victorian bathing customs. Men and women were assigned separate bathing times, typically with women enjoying the privilege of the morning hours when the water was considered most beneficial and the sun less harsh. Ladies' bathing hours generally extended from 6 in the morning until noon, while gentlemen were relegated to the afternoon and evening sessions. This temporal separation ensured that the two sexes would never encounter each other in states of undress, maintaining the moral standards that Victorian society held sacred. The enforcement of these temporal boundaries was the responsibility of beach attendants and local authorities, who patrolled the shoreline with pocket watches, ensuring that no transgression occurred. Violators faced social censure and, in some cases, legal consequences. The rigid adherence to these schedules meant that families often had to coordinate their seaside activities carefully with husbands and wives, taking turns to supervise their children's beach activities. Within these designated time periods, further hierarchies emerged based on social class and respectability. The most fashionable and expensive bathing machines were reserved for the aristocracy and wealthy merchants, who often maintained seasonal subscriptions to ensure their preferred accommodations. These premium machines were positioned in the most desirable locations along the beach, offering the best views and the most convenient access to the water. The middle classes, ever conscious of their social standing, competed fiercely for the remaining quality machines, often booking weeks in advance to secure their preferred times and locations. Working-class families, when they could afford the luxury of sea bathing at all, were relegated to the less desirable machines and time slots, often during the hottest part of the day or when the tide was less favorable. The role of the dipper was central to the bathing machine experience and represented a unique profession that emerged from the specific needs of Victorian seaside culture. These attendants, typically robust individuals of the working class, were responsible for much more than simply wheeling the machines into the surf. They served as guardians of propriety, ensuring that their charges maintained appropriate decorum throughout the bathing process. Female dippers, known as bathing women, attended to lady bathers and were often formidable figures who commanded respect through their expertise and authority. They assisted with the complex process of changing into bathing costumes, provided guidance on safe bathing practices, and maintained strict surveillance to prevent any breach of modesty. Many of these women developed reputations for their skill and discretion, attracting loyal clienteles who would request their services specifically. Male dippers, or bathing men, performed similar functions for gentlemen bathers, though their role was generally less complex due to the somewhat relaxed standards applied to male modesty. Nevertheless, they were expected to maintain professional standards and ensure that their charges behaved appropriately while in the water. The training of dippers was largely informal, with knowledge passed down through generations of seaside families. They needed to possess not only physical strength, but also diplomatic skills to manage the often demanding and temperamental clients who employed their services. The best dippers could judge weather conditions, assess the safety of the water, and provide basic medical assistance if needed. The bathing costume itself was subject to detailed regulations that varied by location and evolved throughout the Victorian period. Early bathing dresses were essentially modified versions of regular clothing made from heavy materials that provided complete coverage but became extremely cumbersome when wet. These garments typically featured long sleeves, high necklines and skirts that extended well below the knee. As the century progressed, bathing costumes became somewhat more practical while still maintaining the essential requirement of modesty. The introduction of knitted fabrics allowed for better fit and movement, though the garments remained heavy and restrictive by modern standards. Colors were typically dark to prevent any suggestion of transparency, when wet, with navy blue, black, and dark green being the most popular choices. The accessories accompanying bathing costumes were equally important in maintaining propriety. Bathing caps were mandatory for women to prevent their hair from becoming disheveled, while special bathing shoes protected feet from sharp shells and rocks. Some ladies carried small waterproof bags containing smelling salts and other remedies in case of fainting or distress. The actual process of sea bathing was highly ritualized and bore little resemblance to the casual swimming enjoyed today. Bathers were not expected to swim in the modern sense, but rather to immerse themselves briefly in the water for health benefits. The prescribed method involved entering the water, slowly allowing the body to adjust to the temperature, and then submerging oneself completely for a few moments before quickly returning to the bathing machine. The duration of bathing was strictly regulated with medical authorities, recommending no more than a few minutes of immersion to avoid the supposed dangers of prolonged exposure to cold water. Dippers carried pocket watches, to ensure that their charges did not exceed the recommended time limits, and they were authorized to physically remove bathers who lingered too long in the water. The social aspects of bathing extended beyond the water itself to encompass the entire seaside experience. The promenade served as a stage for the display of fashion and social status, with the latest bathing costumes and accessories being scrutinized as carefully as any ballroom attire. Ladies would often change into elaborate post-bathing outfits, complete with parasols and decorative shawls, to signal their successful completion of the healthful ritual. The medical establishment played a crucial role in legitimizing and regulating bathing customs. Physicians prescribed specific bathing regimens for various ailments, detailing the optimal water temperature, duration of immersion, and frequency of treatment. These medical recommendations provided scientific justification for what might otherwise have been seen as frivolous recreation, elevating sea bathing to the status of legitimate therapy. The influence of medical opinion extended to the design and operation of bathing facilities. Some resorts employed resident physicians who supervised bathing activities and provided consultation on proper techniques. These medical professionals often published pamphlets and guides that detailed the correct procedures for sea bathing, contributing to the standardization of practices across different locations. The economic implications of bathing customs were significant for seaside communities. The rigid scheduling and elaborate protocols required substantial investment in facilities and personnel, creating employment opportunities for local residents while generating revenue for resort operators. The seasonal nature of the bathing industry meant that communities had to maximize their earnings during the summer months to sustain themselves through the off-season. The international reputation of British bathing customs influenced practices in other countries, with European and colonial resorts adopting similar protocols. This cultural export helped establish British standards as the gold standard for respectable seaside recreation, contributing to the broader influence of Victorian social norms throughout the English-speaking world. The literature and journalism of the period provide extensive documentation of bathing customs, with detailed accounts of proper procedures appearing in guidebooks, magazines, and personal correspondence. These sources reveal the anxiety and excitement that surrounded the bathing experience, particularly for first-time participants who were uncertain about the complex social requirements. The enforcement of bathing etiquette was not limited to official authorities, but extended to the community of bathers themselves, who served as informal monitors of proper behavior. Social pressure was often more effective than legal sanctions in ensuring compliance with established norms, as the threat of ostracism or ridicule was sufficient to deter most potential transgressors. The evolution of bathing customs throughout the Victorian period reflected broader changes in social attitudes and medical understanding. Early practices were extremely conservative, with minimal exposure to water and maximum emphasis on modesty. As the century progressed, there was a gradual relaxation of some restrictions, though the fundamental principles of segregation and propriety remained unchanged. The regional variations in bathing customs added complexity to the social landscape of Victorian seaside recreation. Different resorts developed their own traditions and requirements, often influenced by local social hierarchies and cultural preferences. Visitors had to familiarize themselves with local customs to avoid embarrassment or social censure. The training and certification of bathing attendants became increasingly formalized as the industry matured. Some resorts established schools for dippers, providing instruction in proper techniques and customer service. The most skilled attendants could command premium wages and often developed personal relationships with wealthy clients who valued their expertise and discretion. The technological innovations that emerged from the bathing industry extended beyond the machines themselves to encompass a wide range of specialized equipment and accessories. Manufacturers developed waterproof materials, improved fastening systems, and specialized tools designed specifically for the unique requirements of seaside recreation. The cultural legacy of Victorian bathing customs extended far beyond their practical function, influencing literature, art, and popular culture for generations. The elaborate rituals and social hierarchies associated with sea bathing provided rich material for satirists and social commentators who found in these customs a perfect metaphor for the complexities and contradictions of Victorian society. As Eleanor prepared for her own bathing adventure, she was entering a world governed by these intricate social rules and customs. The success of her experience would depend not only on her physical courage, but also on her ability to navigate the complex social expectations that surrounded every aspect of Victorian seaside recreation. Eleanor's heart quickened as she approached the row of bathing machines that lined Brighton's pebbled shore. The morning sun cast long shadows across the beach, and the gentle lapping of waves against the wooden wheels created a rhythmic soundtrack to her mounting anticipation. She had observed this ritual countless times from the safety of the promenade, but now she was to become an active participant in the elaborate dance of Victorian seaside propriety. The machine she had reserved was painted a cheerful shade of seafoam green with the Britannia inscribed in gold lettering across its front panel. Its proprietor, Mrs. Hartwell, was a stout woman in her 50s who had been operating bathing machines for over 2 decades. Her weathered hands and sun-darkened complexion spoke of countless hours spent facilitating the seaside adventures of nervous ladies and eager gentlemen. Eleanor's mother accompanied her to the machine, offering last-minute words of encouragement mixed with gentle reminders about proper deportment. The family had spent the previous evening discussing the upcoming adventure with Eleanor's father, consulting his collection of medical journals to ensure that the prescribed bathing regimen would provide maximum benefit to his daughter's constitution. The interior of the bathing machine was more spacious than Eleanor had anticipated, though still cramped by the standards of a proper dressing room. The wooden walls were painted white to maximize the available light, and small ventilation slats near the ceiling allowed fresh air to circulate. A sturdy bench ran along one wall, while hooks and pegs provided storage for clothing and personal effects. Mrs. Hartwell's assistant, a young woman named Mary who served as Eleanor's designated bathing attendant, helped her navigate the complex process of changing into her bathing costume. The garment itself was a marvel of Victorian engineering, constructed from heavy navy wool that promised to maintain its modesty even when thoroughly soaked. The dress featured long sleeves, a high neckline, and a skirt that extended well below the knee, with matching bloomers underneath for additional coverage. The process of donning the bathing costume was considerably more complex than Eleanor had anticipated. The heavy fabric required careful manipulation to avoid wrinkles or improper fit, and the numerous buttons and ties demanded patience and dexterity. Mary's experienced hands proved invaluable in navigating the intricacies of Victorian bathing attire, adjusting straps and smoothing fabric with practiced efficiency. Once properly attired, Eleanor felt the weight of the wet wool pressing against her skin even before entering the water. The costume was designed to absorb moisture, gradually preventing any sudden shock to the system that might prove harmful to delicate feminine sensibilities. The dark color was chosen specifically to prevent any suggestion of transparency, ensuring that modesty would be maintained even in the most challenging circumstances. The bathing cap was the final element of Eleanor's aquatic ensemble, a close-fitting creation of rubberized fabric that would protect her carefully arranged hair from the damaging effects of salt water. The cap featured decorative trim and small ties that secured it firmly in place, though Eleanor found the tight fit somewhat uncomfortable and claustrophobic. As the preparations neared completion, Eleanor could hear the sounds of the beach filtering through the wooden walls of the machine. Children's laughter mixed with the calls of vendors hawking refreshments and souvenirs, while the steady rhythm of waves provided a constant reminder of the adventure that awaited her. The familiar sounds of everyday life seemed somehow distant and muffled, as if the bathing machine existed in a separate world governed by different rules and expectations. Mary conducted a final inspection of Eleanor's appearance, adjusting the fit of the bathing costume and ensuring that every element was properly secured. The attendant's experienced eye caught details that might have escaped notice, preventing potential embarrassment or impropriety once the machine entered the water. This attention to detail was part of the professional service that distinguished reputable bathing machine operators from their less scrupulous competitors. The signal came from outside that the tide was at its optimal level for bathing, and Mrs. Hartwell's voice could be heard directing the positioning of the machine. Eleanor felt a flutter of nervous excitement as she realized that the moment of truth had finally arrived. The theoretical adventure she had contemplated for so long was about to become reality, with all the uncertainty and exhilaration that such a transformation entailed. The bathing machine's wheels began to turn with a creaking sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. Eleanor gripped the wooden bench as the machine swayed gently from side to side, the uneven surface of the beach creating a rocking motion that was both soothing and slightly unsettling. Through the small window, she could see the familiar landmarks of the shore gradually receding as the machine made its way toward the water's edge. The transition from dry sand to wet beach created a noticeable change in the machine's movement, with the wheels sinking slightly into the softer surface and requiring more effort from the attendants who guided its progress. Eleanor could hear Mrs. Hartwell calling out instructions to her assistants, coordinating the careful choreography required to position the machine at the optimal depth for safe and comfortable bathing. The first contact between the machine's wheels and the incoming waves produced a gentle splashing sound that sent a thrill of anticipation through Eleanor's nervous system. The reality of her situation began to sink in as she realized that she was now suspended above the open sea, separated from the vast expanse of water only by the wooden floor of the bathing machine and her own rapidly diminishing courage. The machine came to a halt when the water reached approximately waist depth, a position that had been calculated to provide safe access while maintaining the privacy that was so essential to the entire enterprise. Eleanor could hear the waves lapping against the wooden wheels and feel the slight movement of the machine as it responded to the gentle motion of the sea. Mary began the process of preparing the rear entrance for Eleanor's emergence into the water, unfurling the canvas awning that would provide additional privacy and checking the security of the rope ladder that would assist in the descent. These final preparations were conducted with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized every aspect of the bathing machine experience. The moment of truth arrived as Mary opened the rear door of the machine, revealing the sparkling expanse of the English Channel stretching to the horizon. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, offering Eleanor her first unobstructed view of the element she was about to enter. The water appeared deeper and more turbulent than it had from the safety of the shore, with small waves creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to dance across the surface. Eleanor's initial reaction was a mixture of awe and apprehension as she contemplated the vast expanse of water that surrounded the bathing machine. The sea seemed simultaneously inviting and intimidating, promising both refreshment and potential danger. The careful preparations and elaborate protocols suddenly seemed entirely justified as she realized the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. The temperature of the sea air was noticeably cooler than the confined atmosphere inside the bathing machine, and Eleanor felt a shiver of anticipation as the reality of her situation became fully apparent. The familiar world of the beach seemed distant and abstract, while the immediate challenge of entering the water demanded her complete attention and courage. Mary provided gentle encouragement and practical guidance as Eleanor approached the threshold between the safety of the machine and the uncertainty of the sea. The attendant's calm professionalism helped to steady Eleanor's nerves and reminded her that countless other ladies had successfully navigated this same transition. The ritual nature of the experience provided a sense of continuity and tradition that was both comforting and empowering. The sound of the waves against the machine's wheels created a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to synchronize with Eleanor's heartbeat as she prepared to take the final step into the water. The elaborate preparations and careful protocols had brought her to this moment of decision where theory would finally give way to experience and imagination would be replaced by reality. Eleanor's hand gripped the rope ladder as she prepared to descend into the sea, her mind racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The bathing costume felt heavy and cumbersome, but also protective and reassuring, a tangible reminder of the social conventions that governed even this most adventurous of activities. The moment she had anticipated for so long was finally at hand, and there could be no turning back from the adventure that awaited her in the sparkling waters of the English Channel. The elaborate ritual of Victorian sea bathing had reached its climax, and Eleanor stood poised on the threshold between the familiar world of social convention and the unknown realm of physical adventure. The bathing machine had served its purpose in bringing her safely to this point, but the final step into the water would require her own courage and determination. The sea waited patiently, its surface reflecting the morning sun in countless points of light that seemed to beckon her forward into the embrace of the tide. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she gripped the wooden bench inside the bathing machine, feeling the gentle sway as the contraption settled into its position in the surf. The interior, which had seemed spacious moments before, now felt intimate and cocoon-like, a private sanctuary suspended between the familiar world of the shore and the vast unknown of the sea. The sound of waves lapping against the wooden wheels created a rhythmic percussion that seemed to match the rapid beating of her heart. The walls of the machine, painted white to maximize the available light, seemed to glow with the reflection of sunlight dancing on the water outside. Through the small window at the front, Eleanor could see the distant figures on the beach, now reduced to tiny silhouettes that emphasized her isolation in this floating chamber. The familiar sounds of the seaside resort, children's laughter, vendors' calls. The clip-clop of horses on the promenade seemed muffled and distant, as if filtered through layers of water and wood. Mary, her bathing attendant, moved with practiced efficiency in the confined space, making final adjustments to Eleanor's bathing costume and ensuring that every element was properly secured. The heavy wool fabric of the dress had already begun to absorb moisture from the humid sea air, adding weight to the garment and making Eleanor acutely aware of its presence against her skin. The sensation was both protective and constraining, a tangible reminder of the social conventions that governed even this most adventurous of activities. The bathing cap, with its tight rubber construction and decorative trim, pressed against Eleanor's temples with uncomfortable persistence. She had practiced wearing it during her preparations at the hotel, but the reality of its confinement was more pronounced now that the moment of truth had arrived. The cap served both practical and symbolic purposes, protecting her carefully arranged hair while signaling her adherence to the strict codes of feminine propriety that governed Victorian society. The interior of the bathing machine bore the accumulated patina of countless previous adventures. The wooden surfaces showed the wear patterns of nervous hands gripping benches and walls, while the hooks and pegs displayed the slight discoloration that came from supporting damp clothing and personal effects. These subtle signs of use provided Eleanor with a sense of continuity, connecting her experience to the thousands of other ladies who had undergone this same ritual transformation. The ventilation slats near the ceiling allowed fresh sea air to circulate through the machine, carrying with it the distinctive scent of saltwater seaweed and the faint aroma of tar from the wooden wheels. This olfactory cocktail was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced in her London drawing room, and it served to heighten her awareness of the unique environment she had entered. The air itself seemed charged with possibility and adventure. Mary's movements within the confined space demonstrated the skill that came from years of experience in facilitating these aquatic adventures. She knew exactly how to position herself to avoid interfering with Eleanor's preparations while remaining close enough to provide assistance when needed. Her calm professionalism served as an anchor of stability in what was for Eleanor an entirely novel and somewhat overwhelming experience. The sound of Mrs. Hartwell's voice calling instructions to her assistants outside provided a reassuring reminder that Eleanor was not alone in this endeavor. The bathing machine operator's decades of experience had taught her to anticipate every possible complication and to coordinate the complex logistics required to ensure her client's safety and satisfaction. This expertise was part of the premium service that distinguished reputable operators from their less experienced competitors. The gentle rocking motion of the machine as it responded to the movement of the waves created a sensation that was both soothing and slightly disorienting. Eleanor had never experienced anything quite like this combination of enclosure and motion, and she found herself gripping the bench more tightly as she adjusted to the unfamiliar sensations. The machine seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the sea, rising and falling in harmony with the natural forces that surrounded it. Through the rear window, Eleanor could see the canvas awning being prepared for deployment, its white fabric bright against the blue-green water. This additional layer of privacy would shield her from any possible observation during the critical moments of her emergence into the sea. The awning represented the final barrier between the public world of the beach and the private realm of her bathing experience. The temperature inside the machine had begun to moderate as the sea air circulated through the ventilation system, replacing the stuffier atmosphere that had prevailed during the journey from shore. This cooling effect was welcome, as Eleanor had begun to feel uncomfortably warm in her heavy bathing costume. The change in temperature served as another reminder that she was now in a different environment, governed by different rules and conditions. Mary began to explain the procedures that would govern Eleanor's emergence into the water, her voice calm and reassuring despite the novel circumstances. The attendant's instructions covered everything from the proper method of gripping the rope ladder to the recommended duration of immersion. These guidelines had been developed through years of experience and were designed to ensure both safety and propriety during the bathing process. The rope ladder itself was a marvel of practical engineering, constructed from sturdy hemp rope with wooden rungs that had been treated to resist the corrosive effects of salt water. The ladder was designed to support the weight of a fully dressed bather while providing secure footing on the wet wooden steps. Its installation required careful attention to ensure that it would remain stable during use. Eleanor's bathing costume had continued to absorb moisture from the humid air, and she could feel its weight increasing with each passing moment. The heavy wool fabric was designed to provide modesty and protection, but it also created a sense of encumbrance that was entirely foreign to her usual experience of clothing. The costume seemed to have a life of its own, responding to the moisture and movement in ways that required constant attention and adjustment. The small mirror mounted on the interior wall reflected Eleanor's transformed appearance, showing her a version of herself that seemed both familiar and strange. The bathing costume and cap had altered her silhouette dramatically, creating a figure that conformed to the specific requirements of seaside propriety, while bearing little resemblance to her usual drawing-room appearance. This visual transformation served as a powerful reminder of the ritual nature of the experience she was undergoing. The sound of water lapping against the machine's wheels had become a constant presence, creating a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to slow time and heighten Eleanor's awareness of each passing moment. The gentle percussion of waves against wood provided a natural soundtrack to her preparations, connecting her to the elemental forces that would soon surround her completely. Mary's final inspection of Eleanor's appearance was conducted with the thoroughness of a military review, checking every button, tie, and fold to ensure that nothing had been overlooked. This attention to detail was not merely perfectionism, but a practical necessity, as any failure of the bathing costume could result in embarrassment or impropriety once Eleanor entered the water. The attendant's experienced eye caught subtleties that might have escaped notice, preventing potential problems before they could occur. The moment of transition was approaching, and Eleanor could feel the weight of anticipation settling over her like a physical presence. The elaborate preparations and careful protocols had brought her to this threshold where the theoretical adventure she had contemplated for so long would finally become reality. The bathing machine had served its purpose in providing a safe and private space for her transformation, but the next phase of the experience would require her to leave its protective embrace. The rear door of the machine remained closed, but Eleanor could sense the vast expanse of water that lay beyond its wooden barrier. The sea seemed to call to her through the walls of the machine, promising both refreshment and challenge in equal measure. The careful balance between safety and adventure that characterized the entire bathing machine experience was about to be tested in the most direct possible way. Eleanor's breathing had become more rapid and shallow as the moment of truth approached her body, responding to the combination of excitement and apprehension that filled her consciousness. The bathing costume, with its layers of heavy fabric and restrictive construction, seemed to amplify every sensation and emotion, creating a heightened awareness of her physical presence in this unique environment. The ritual aspects of the bathing machine experience had taken on greater significance as Eleanor progressed through each stage of the process. What had initially seemed like mere convention now revealed itself as a carefully constructed framework designed to transform an ordinary person into an aquatic adventurer while maintaining the social boundaries that defined Victorian society. The machine itself was both vehicle and sanctuary, providing the means for transformation while preserving the essential elements of propriety and safety. Mary's presence in the confined space had become increasingly important as Eleanor's nervousness mounted. The attendants' calm professionalism served as a stabilizing influence, reminding Eleanor that countless other ladies had successfully navigated this same experience. The continuity of tradition provided comfort and confidence, suggesting that what seemed extraordinary to Eleanor was, in fact, a well-established and thoroughly tested procedure. The sounds from outside the machine had taken on new significance as Eleanor's departure approached. Mrs. Hartwell's voice calling final instructions to her assistants represented the last connection to the organized world of the beach resort. Soon, Eleanor would be alone with the sea, dependent on her own courage and the protection provided by her elaborate costume and the floating sanctuary of the bathing machine. The interior of the machine had become a world unto itself, complete with its own atmosphere, sounds, and sensations. Eleanor had undergone a complete transformation within its wooden walls, emerging as a different version of herself, one equipped for aquatic adventure while remaining firmly grounded in the social conventions of her time. The machine had served as a chrysalis, facilitating her metamorphosis from land-dwelling lady to sea-bathing adventurer. As the final moments of preparation drew to a close, Eleanor found herself poised on the threshold between two worlds, the familiar realm of Victorian propriety and the unknown territory of physical adventure. The bathing machine had brought her safely to this point of decision, but the next step would require her own courage and determination. The sea waited patiently beyond the wooden walls, its surface reflecting the morning sun in countless points of light that seemed to beckon her forward into the embrace of the tide. The moment had arrived when Eleanor's bathing machine would begin its carefully orchestrated journey from the safety of the dry beach into the embrace of the sea. Mrs. Hartwell's voice rang out with practiced authority as she directed her team of assistants, their movements coordinated through years of experience in navigating the complex logistics of Victorian seaside recreation. The machine creaked slightly as the attendants positioned themselves around its sturdy frame, preparing to guide it across the shifting terrain that lay between shore and surf. The initial movement was gentle, almost imperceptible, as the heavy wooden wheels began to turn against the resistance of the dry sand. Eleanor felt the subtle shift in the machine's position as it started its slow progress toward the water, the sensation both thrilling and slightly unsettling. The familiar stability of solid ground was gradually giving way to something more fluid and unpredictable, marking the beginning of her transformation from land-dwelling observer to active participant in the ancient ritual of sea bathing. The wheels of the bathing machine had been specifically designed for this challenging terrain, their broad surfaces distributing the weight of the structure across the yielding sand. The iron rims were reinforced to withstand the constant friction and impact of beach operations, while the wooden spokes were treated with special preservatives to resist the corrosive effects of salt water. These engineering details, invisible to the casual observer, represented years of refinement and improvement in the bathing machine industry. As the machine progressed across the beach, Eleanor could hear the changing texture of the sand beneath the wheels, from the dry, loose grains near the promenade to the firmer, more compact surface closer to the water's edge. Each transition created a different sound and sensation, providing an auditory map of the journey that was taking place outside the wooden walls of her temporary sanctuary. The rhythmic creaking of the wheels and axles created a mechanical percussion that complemented the natural sounds of the seaside environment. The attendants who guided the machine's progress were skilled professionals who understood the subtle variations in beach conditions that could affect the safety and comfort of their charges. They knew how to read the signs of shifting sand, changing tides, and weather conditions that might influence the bathing experience. Their expertise was part of the premium service that distinguished reputable bathing machine operators from their less experienced competitors. The gradient of the beach began to change as the machine approached the water's edge, creating a gentle downward slope that required careful management to maintain control and stability. The attendants adjusted their positions and techniques accordingly, ensuring that the machine's descent remained smooth and controlled despite the changing terrain. This phase of the journey demanded particular attention to safety, as any loss of control could result in damage to the machine or injury to its occupant. Eleanor could feel the subtle changes in the machine's movement as it navigated the varying conditions of the beach surface. The slight tilting and swaying motions were entirely new sensations for someone accustomed to the stable floors of drawing rooms and carriages. These physical experiences served to heighten her awareness of the adventure she was undertaking, making her acutely conscious of every moment of the journey toward the sea. The sound of waves grew progressively louder as the machine approached the water's edge, their rhythmic crash and retreat, creating an increasingly dominant presence in Eleanor's auditory environment. What had been a distant background murmur from the safety of the promenade now became an immediate and powerful force that seemed to call to her through the wooden walls of the machine. The sea was no longer an abstract concept, but a tangible reality that would soon surround her completely. The first contact between the machine's wheels and the wet sand created a noticeable change in both sound and sensation. The wheels began to sink slightly into the softer surface, requiring more effort from the attendants and creating a different quality of movement that Eleanor could feel through the floor of the machine. This transition marked a significant milestone in the journey, as the machine had now entered the domain of the sea and was subject to its influence. The attendants' voices took on a different quality as they coordinated their efforts to manage the machine's progress through the increasingly challenging terrain. Their calls and responses created a working rhythm that spoke of long experience and professional competence. Eleanor found their calm efficiency reassuring, as it suggested that what seemed extraordinary to her was in fact a routine operation that had been performed countless times before. The machine's progress slowed as it encountered the resistance of the wet sand and the gentle pressure of the incoming waves. Each forward movement now required deliberate effort and careful coordination as the attendants worked to maintain control while allowing the natural forces of the sea to assist in positioning the machine at the optimal depth for bathing. This delicate balance between human effort and natural forces was central to the entire bathing machine operation. Eleanor could hear the first tentative splashes as the waves began to make contact with the lower portions of the machine's wheels. The sound was both exciting and slightly alarming, marking the point at which the theoretical adventure began to become physical reality. The sea was no longer something to be observed from a distance, but an active participant in the experience she was undergoing. The machine's movement became more complex as it entered the zone where waves and sand interacted in constantly changing patterns. The attendants had to adjust their techniques continuously, responding to the shifting conditions created by the tide and the machine's own presence in the water. This dynamic environment required skills that could only be developed through extensive experience and careful observation of natural conditions. The sensation of the machine responding to the movement of the water was unlike anything Eleanor had previously experienced. The gentle rocking motion created by the waves was both soothing and slightly disorienting as her body adjusted to the unfamiliar rhythm of the sea. The machine seemed to come alive in the water, responding to forces that were entirely different from those that governed its movement on dry land. The sound of water lapping against the wooden wheels created a new acoustic environment that seemed to envelop the machine in liquid music. The rhythmic splashing and gurgling sounds were hypnotic in their regularity, creating a natural soundtrack that seemed to slow time and heighten Eleanor's awareness of each passing moment. The sea had begun to claim the machine as its own, transforming it from a land-based vehicle into a floating sanctuary. The attendants' expertise became even more apparent as they navigated the complex challenge of positioning the machine at precisely the right depth for safe and comfortable bathing. Too shallow, and the bather would be exposed to public view. Too deep, and the risks would become unacceptable. The optimal position required careful judgment of tidal conditions, wave patterns, and the specific requirements of the individual bather. Eleanor could feel the machine settling into its final position as the attendants completed their careful choreography of placement and securing. The wheels had found their purchase in the sandy bottom, and the structure had achieved the stable equilibrium that would allow for safe bathing operations. The journey from shore to sea was complete, and the machine had been transformed from a vehicle into a floating changing room and diving platform. The sounds from outside the machine had taken on a different quality now that it was surrounded by water. The voices of the attendants seemed both closer and more distant, filtered through the liquid medium that now surrounded the lower portion of the structure. The familiar sounds of the beach resort had become muffled and abstract, replaced by the immediate presence of the sea and its constant motion. The machine's response to the movement of the waves created a gentle, swaying motion that Eleanor found both relaxing and slightly unsettling. The structure seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the sea, rising and falling in harmony with the natural forces that surrounded it. This organic movement was entirely different from the mechanical motion of carriages or trains, connecting Eleanor more directly to the elemental forces of nature. The temperature inside the machine had begun to change as the sea air circulated more freely through the ventilation system. The humid, salt-laden atmosphere was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced in her London drawing room, and it served to heighten her awareness of the unique environment she had entered. The air itself seemed charged with the energy of the sea, carrying with it the promise of adventure and transformation. The final positioning of the machine required minute adjustments as the attendants ensured that all safety requirements were met and that the structure was properly secured against the movement of the waves. These last-minute refinements were crucial to the success of the bathing operation, as any instability or improper positioning could compromise both safety and privacy. The attendants' attention to these details reflected their professional commitment to providing the highest quality service. Eleanor could hear Mrs. Hartwell conducting a final inspection of the machine's position and security, her experienced voice calling out checkpoints and confirmations to her assistants. This systematic approach to safety reflected the serious responsibility that bathing machine operators accepted when they undertook to transport their clients from the familiar world of the shore into the unpredictable realm of the sea. The machine had now completed its transformation from a land-based changing room into a floating platform for aquatic adventure. The journey from shore to sea had been accomplished with the skill and precision that came from years of experience and careful attention to the complex requirements of Victorian seaside recreation. Eleanor was now positioned at the threshold between two worlds, ready to take the final step from the safety of the machine into the embrace of the sea. The elaborate choreography of the journey to the water had served multiple purposes beyond the merely practical. It had provided time for Eleanor to adjust mentally and physically to the adventure she was undertaking, while also demonstrating the serious commitment to safety and propriety that characterized the entire bathing machine operation. The careful progression from shore to sea had been both a physical journey and a ritual transformation, preparing Eleanor for the extraordinary experience that awaited her in the waters of the English Channel. As the machine settled into its final position, surrounded by the gentle movement of the waves and the constant music of the sea, Eleanor found herself poised on the brink of an adventure that would test her courage, challenge her preconceptions, and provide her with memories that would last a lifetime. The journey to the water was complete, and the moment of truth was at hand. The rear door of the bathing machine swung open with a gentle creak, revealing the vast expanse of the English Channel stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as she gazed upon the scene that had been hidden from view during her journey from shore. The water sparkled with countless diamonds of reflected sunlight, each wave crest catching and scattering the morning rays in a display of natural brilliance that no ballroom chandelier could match. The canvas awning unfurled above the machine's rear opening, creating a private alcove that shielded Eleanor from any possible observation, while she made her transition from the wooden sanctuary into the embrace of the sea. The white fabric fluttered gently in the sea breeze, its movement creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that danced across the water's surface. This final barrier between public scrutiny and private adventure represented the culmination of Victorian ingenuity in balancing propriety with pleasure. Mary extended her hand to assist Eleanor as she approached the threshold, her experienced touch providing both physical support and emotional reassurance. The attendant's calm demeanor served as an anchor of stability in what was for Eleanor a moment of profound transformation. The rope ladder descended into the water, with its wooden rungs disappearing beneath the surface, creating a pathway between the familiar world of the machine and the unknown realm of the sea. The first sensation that struck Eleanor was the temperature difference between the enclosed atmosphere of the bathing machine and the open air above the water. The sea breeze carried with it a coolness that seemed to penetrate the heavy fabric of her bathing costume, creating an immediate awareness of the elemental forces that surrounded her. The air itself seemed alive with moisture and movement, charged with the energy of the vast ocean that stretched beyond the visible horizon. The sound of the waves had become immediate and encompassing, no longer filtered through the wooden walls of the machine, but present in all its natural complexity. Eleanor could distinguish the different tones and rhythms within, the seemingly simple sound of water meeting shore, from the gentle lapping against the machine's wheels to the more distant crash of larger waves breaking further out to sea. This acoustic environment was entirely foreign to her London drawing-room experience, yet somehow deeply familiar in a way that spoke to something primal within her consciousness. Eleanor's grip tightened on the rope ladder as she prepared to take her first step into the water. The wooden rung felt solid and reassuring beneath her foot, its surface roughened to provide secure purchase even when wet. The ladder had been positioned with careful attention to the optimal angle and depth, ensuring that Eleanor could descend gradually into the water without any sudden shock or loss of control. The initial contact between Eleanor's foot and the seawater sent a jolt of sensation through her entire body. The temperature was significantly cooler than she had anticipated, despite Mary's warnings and her own mental preparations. The cold seemed to penetrate the heavy wool of her bathing costume, almost immediately creating a sharp contrast with the warmth she had felt while enclosed within the machine. This physical shock served as a powerful reminder that she was now entering an environment governed by forces entirely different from those that shaped her everyday experience. The second step brought Eleanor deeper into the water, with the sea now reaching above her ankles and beginning to exert its influence on the movement of her heavy bathing costume. The wool fabric, already weighted with absorbed moisture from the humid air, became even heavier as it made direct contact with the seawater. The sensation was both constraining and protective, as the costume fulfilled its dual purpose of maintaining modesty while allowing for the prescribed health benefits of sea bathing. Eleanor's breathing became more rapid and shallow as she adjusted to the multiple sensations that accompanied her entry into the water. The cold temperature, the unfamiliar buoyancy, the weight of her saturated costume, and the constant movement of the waves combined to create a sensory experience unlike anything she had previously encountered. Her body seemed to be learning a new language of physical sensation, one that spoke of ancient connections between human beings and the sea. The third step on the ladder brought Eleanor to a depth where the water reached nearly to her knees, and she could feel the gentle but persistent pressure of the waves against her legs. The sea seemed to be testing her resolve, pushing and pulling with a rhythm that was both soothing and slightly challenging. The bathing costume's heavy skirt swirled around her legs with each movement of the water, creating a sensation that was both strange and oddly comforting. Mary's voice provided gentle encouragement and practical guidance as Eleanor continued her descent into the water. The attendants' instructions covered everything from the proper breathing techniques to the recommended duration of immersion, drawing upon years of experience in facilitating these aquatic adventures. Her calm professionalism served as a reminder that what seemed extraordinary to Eleanor was, in fact, a well-established procedure that had been successfully completed by countless other ladies. The fourth step brought Eleanor to a depth where the water reached her waist, and she could feel the full force of the sea's embrace surrounding the lower portion of her body. The sensation was both invigorating and slightly overwhelming as her nervous system processed the complex array of new stimuli. The cold water seemed to awaken every nerve ending, creating a heightened awareness of her physical presence that was entirely different from her usual experience of embodiment. The buoyancy of the seawater began to assert itself as Eleanor descended further, reducing the apparent weight of her heavy bathing costume and creating a sensation of lightness that seemed to defy the laws of physics as she understood them. This partial weightlessness was both liberating and disorienting as her body adjusted to moving in a medium that offered both support and resistance in ways that were entirely foreign to her terrestrial experience. Eleanor's hands gripped the rope ladder with increasing intensity as she felt the sea's power asserting itself around her body. The waves, which had seemed gentle and manageable from the safety of the machine, now revealed themselves as forces of considerable strength and persistence. Each surge of water brought with it a reminder of the ocean's vast power, humbling in its implications, yet exhilarating in its immediacy. The prescribed method of sea bathing required Eleanor to immerse herself completely in the water for a brief period, allowing the supposed health benefits to penetrate her system while avoiding the dangers of prolonged exposure. This moment of total submersion represented the climax of the entire bathing machine experience, the point at which theory gave way to practice and anticipation was replaced by direct physical encounter with the elemental forces of nature. Eleanor took a deep breath and allowed herself to sink beneath the surface of the water, feeling the sea close over her head with a sensation that was both terrifying and transcendent. The world above the waves disappeared, replaced by a liquid universe of muffled sounds and filtered light. The heavy bathing costume, which had seemed so cumbersome on land, now provided a sense of security and protection as she floated in the embrace of the sea. The underwater environment was unlike anything Eleanor had ever experienced, a realm of shifting light and gentle pressure that seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of time and space. The sounds of the surface world were transformed into distant echoes, while new sensations of movement and buoyancy created a sense of weightless freedom that was both liberating and slightly disorienting. For these few precious moments, Eleanor existed in a state of pure physical experience, unmediated by the social conventions and mental constructs that normally governed her consciousness. The emergence from beneath the surface brought Eleanor back into the world of air and light with a gasp of surprise and exhilaration. The familiar sensations of breathing and seeing returned with renewed intensity, as if her brief submersion had somehow sharpened her awareness of these basic functions. The water streamed from her bathing cap and costume, carrying with it the salt and essence of the sea that would remain with her long after the experience had ended. The prescribed duration of sea bathing was carefully limited to prevent any harmful effects from prolonged exposure to the cold water. Mary's voice called out the time remaining, ensuring that Eleanor would receive the optimal health benefits without risking the dangers that Victorian medical opinion associated with excessive immersion. This careful regulation of the experience reflected the serious scientific approach that characterized the era's understanding of therapeutic sea bathing. Eleanor's body had begun to adjust to the temperature and movement of the water, finding a rhythm that allowed her to enjoy the experience while maintaining the proper decorum required by Victorian standards. The initial shock of immersion had given way to a more comfortable accommodation with the sea's embrace, though the fundamental strangeness of the experience remained undiminished. She was learning to move in harmony with the waves, rather than fighting against their persistent motion. The sensation of floating in the open sea, supported by the natural buoyancy of the salt water and protected by the privacy of the bathing machine's awning, created a unique form of freedom that was both physical and psychological. For these precious moments, Eleanor was liberated from the constraints of gravity, fashion, and social expectation, existing in a state of pure being that connected her directly to the elemental forces of nature. The time for emergence arrived with Mary's gentle but insistent call, and Eleanor began her careful ascent of the rope ladder back toward the safety of the bathing machine. Each step upward brought her back into the world of air and social convention, though the memory of her aquatic adventure would remain vivid in her consciousness. The transition from water to air was as dramatic as the initial descent had been, marking the end of one phase of the experience and the beginning of another. The water streamed from Eleanor's saturated bathing costume as she climbed the ladder, the heavy wool fabric now carrying the additional weight of absorbed seawater. The sensation was both uncomfortable and oddly satisfying as the physical evidence of her adventure clung to her body in the form of salt and moisture. The bathing costume had fulfilled its purpose of maintaining modesty while allowing for the prescribed health benefits of sea immersion. Eleanor's legs trembled slightly as she reached the platform of the bathing machine, whether from the cold water, the physical exertion, or the emotional intensity of the experience, she could not say. Mary was ready with warm towels and practical assistance, helping Eleanor to navigate the transition from aquatic adventurer back to properly dressed Victorian lady. The attendants' experienced hands worked quickly to ensure Eleanor's comfort and warmth during this vulnerable period of the bathing ritual. The interior of the bathing machine seemed like a haven of warmth and security after the vast openness of the sea. Eleanor's body continued to process the sensations of her aquatic adventure, even as she began the process of changing back into her regular clothing. The contrast between the elemental experience of sea bathing and the civilized comfort of the machine's interior served to highlight the extraordinary nature of what she had just accomplished. The sounds of the sea continued to surround the bathing machine, but they had taken on a different quality now that Eleanor had experienced their source directly. The waves that lapped against the wooden wheels were no longer abstract forces, but familiar presences that had embraced her body and welcomed her into their ancient rhythm. The sea had become a known quantity, though it retained all of its mystery and power. Eleanor's reflection in the small mirror showed a face flushed with excitement and exertion, her eyes bright with the memory of her underwater adventure. The bathing cap had protected her hair from the worst effects of the salt water, though small tendrils had escaped to frame her face with damp curls. She looked like someone who had undergone a transformation, though the nature of that change was still unclear to her conscious mind. The process of changing back into her regular clothing was complicated by the lingering effects of her sea-bathing adventure. Her skin retained the coolness of the water and the slight stickiness of dried salt, while her hair carried the distinctive scent of the sea. These physical reminders of her aquatic experience would accompany her back to the world of the resort, serving as private tokens of the extraordinary adventure she had just completed. As Eleanor prepared to leave the bathing machine and return to the familiar world of the beach resort, she found herself profoundly changed by her encounter with the sea. The experience had challenged her preconceptions about her own capabilities and introduced her to sensations and environments that existed far beyond the boundaries of her normal experience. The moment of immersion had been brief, but its effects would resonate through her consciousness for years to come, serving as a reminder of the extraordinary adventures that awaited those brave enough to step beyond the comfortable boundaries of conventional life. The moment Eleanor's feet found the wooden rungs of the rope ladder, she felt the transition from the sea's embrace to the familiar solidity of the bathing machine's platform, the water streaming from her heavy woolen costume in rivulets that pooled on the floorboards beneath her. Mary, ever attentive, wrapped her in thick towels, the coarse fabric rough against skin, still tingling from the cold salt water, and guided her to the bench where she could sit and catch her breath. The interior of the machine, which had seemed confining before, now felt like a sanctuary, a place of warmth and privacy after the vast, unpredictable openness of the sea. Eleanor's hands shook slightly as she began the process of removing her bathing cap and loosening the ties of her sodden dress, the ritual of undressing as deliberate and careful as the one that had preceded her immersion. Each movement was accompanied by the soft sounds of the sea, outside the rhythmic lapping of waves against the wheels, the distant cries of gulls, and the muffled voices of other bathers returning from their own adventures. The world beyond the machine seemed to recede, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the lingering sensations of her time in the water. As she peeled away the layers of her bathing costume, Eleanor became acutely aware of the physical evidence of her experience. The salt crusting her skin, the chill that lingered in her bones, the faint ache in muscles, unaccustomed to the resistance of the waves. These sensations were not unpleasant. Rather, they served as reminders of the challenge she had faced and the exhilaration she had felt in meeting it. The discomfort was a badge of honor, proof that she had ventured beyond the boundaries of her everyday life and returned changed, if only in small private ways. Mary's presence was a steadying influence, her practical assistance and quiet encouragement helping Eleanor to navigate the transition from aquatic adventurer back to properly attired Victorian lady. The attendant's hands were gentle but efficient as she helped Eleanor into her dry undergarments and arranged her hair, restoring order to the chaos left by the sea. The ritual of dressing, so often a mundane part of daily life, took on new significance in this context, marking the end of one phase of the experience and the beginning of another. With each layer of clothing, Eleanor felt herself returning to the world of social convention and expectation, the freedom of the sea gradually replaced by the familiar constraints of fashion and propriety. Yet, beneath the surface, she carried the memory of her immersion, a secret reservoir of strength and confidence that would remain with her long after the salt had been washed from her skin and the chill had faded from her bones. The bathing machine's door opened to admit a rush of fresh sea air, and Eleanor stepped out onto the sand, blinking in the bright sunlight. The beach was alive with activity. Children building sandcastles, vendors selling sweets and souvenirs, families gathered beneath striped umbrellas. The ordinary bustle of the seaside resort seemed both unchanged and subtly different, as if Eleanor's own transformation had altered her perception of the world around her. Her family greeted her with a mixture of relief and pride, her mother fussing over her appearance and her father inquiring about the details of her adventure. Eleanor answered their questions with a new sense of assurance, describing the sensations of the water, the challenge of the waves, and the thrill of stepping beyond the boundaries of her comfort. Her brother listened with wide-eyed fascination, already imagining his own future exploits in the sea. As the day wore on, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the experience, replaying each moment in her mind and savoring the sense of accomplishment that came with having faced her fears and emerged triumphant. The memory of the sea's cold embrace, the weight of the water, and the exhilaration of floating in the open waves became a touchstone, a reminder of her own resilience and capacity for adventure. The return from the bathing machine was not merely a physical journey from sea to shore, but a symbolic passage from uncertainty to confidence, from anticipation to memory. Eleanor's adventure had tested her courage and rewarded her with a sense of freedom that transcended the boundaries of Victorian propriety. The experience would become a cherished story retold in letters to friends and in quiet moments of reflection, a private triumph woven into the fabric of her life. In the days that followed, Eleanor noticed subtle changes in herself, a greater willingness to try new things, a deeper appreciation for the beauty and power of the natural world, and a quiet pride in having participated in a tradition that connected her to generations of women who had braved the sea before her. The bathing machine, once a symbol of constraint and caution, had become for her a vehicle of transformation, a means of discovering new strengths and possibilities within herself. The return and reflection after her first bathing adventure marked not an end, but a beginning, a new chapter in Eleanor's life, shaped by the memory of the sea and the knowledge that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. The Victorian bathing machine, once a symbol of innovation and propriety along the British seaside, began its slow decline as the 19th century drew to a close, and the world entered a new era of social and technological change. The transformation was not abrupt, but rather a gradual process shaped by shifting attitudes, evolving fashions, and the relentless march of progress that characterized the dawn of the 20th century. Changing attitudes toward modesty. The strict codes of modesty that had governed Victorian society for decades began to loosen as new generations challenged the conventions of their elders. The rise of the women's suffrage movement, the spread of new ideas about health and the body, and the influence of continental European leisure culture all contributed to a reimagining of what was considered proper at the seaside. The notion that women needed to be shielded from public view while bathing came to seem increasingly outdated, a relic of a more repressive age. The evolution of swimwear. One of the most significant factors in the decline of the bathing machine was the evolution of swimwear itself. Early Victorian bathing costumes had been designed to conceal the body as much as possible, but by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, new materials and changing tastes led to the development of lighter, more practical garments. The introduction of knitted fabrics, shorter hemlines and sleeveless designs made it easier for both men and women to swim and enjoy the water without the need for a private changing room on wheels. As swimwear became more streamlined and less cumbersome, the elaborate rituals of the bathing machine lost their appeal. The new costumes were not only more comfortable, but also reflected a growing acceptance of the human form and a desire for greater freedom of movement. The beach, once a stage for the display of social status and propriety, became a place of recreation and relaxation for people of all backgrounds, social and technological progress. The decline of the bathing machine was also driven by broader social and technological changes. The expansion of the railway network made seaside resorts accessible to a wider range of people, including the working classes who brought with them different expectations and customs. The democratization of leisure meant that the exclusivity and formality of the Victorian seaside gave way to a more open and egalitarian atmosphere. At the same time, advances in engineering and construction led to the development of new facilities at the beach, such as public bathing pavilions, changing huts and open-air swimming pools. These innovations provided the privacy and convenience once offered by the bathing machine, but in a more modern and efficient form. The old wooden huts on wheels, with their creaking axles and heavy curtains, began to seem quaint and unnecessary in the face of these new amenities. The end of an era. By the early decades of the 20th century, the bathing machine had all but disappeared from British beaches. Some lingered on as curiosities, or were repurposed as beach huts, storage sheds, or even children's playhouses. Others were left to decay, their paint peeling and their wheels sinking into the sand, silent witnesses to a vanished way of life. The memory of the bathing machine, however, endured in the collective imagination. For many, it became a symbol of the peculiarities and contradictions of the Victorian age, a time of both progress and prudery, innovation and inhibition. Later generations looked back on the era of the bathing machine with a mixture of nostalgia and amusement, marveling at the lengths to which their ancestors had gone to preserve modesty while pursuing the pleasures of the sea, legacy and reflection. The decline of the bathing machine marked more than just the end of a particular technology. It signaled a profound shift in the way people related to their bodies, to each other, and to the natural world. The beach, once a site of strict regulation and social hierarchy, became a place of freedom and self-expression, open to all who sought the restorative power of sun, sand, and sea. Yet, even as the bathing machine faded into history, its legacy lived on in the rituals and traditions of seaside culture. The desire for privacy, the importance of personal transformation, and the thrill of venturing into the unknown remained central themes in the ongoing story of the human relationship with the sea. The story of the bathing machine is a reminder that even the most peculiar inventions can have a lasting impact, shaping the way people experience the world and understand themselves. Its decline was not a loss, but a transformation, a step toward a more open, inclusive, and adventurous vision of life by the water's edge. The story of the Victorian bathing machine, with its intricate rituals and elaborate codes of conduct, ultimately invites a personal question. Would you, standing on the pebbled shore in the crisp morning air, have dared to step inside one of those curious wooden huts and venture into the sea? The question is not merely about the mechanics of the machine or the chill of the water, but about the willingness to embrace an experience shaped by the values, anxieties, and aspirations of a different age. To imagine oneself in Eleanor's place is to enter a world where every detail, from the cut of a bathing costume to the timing of a morning dip, was governed by custom and expectation. The act of sea bathing was not simply a matter of personal hygiene or recreation. It was a social performance, a test of courage, and a rite of passage. The bathing machine, with its promise of privacy and propriety, offered a way to navigate the tension between the desire for adventure and the demands of decorum. For some, the prospect of entering the sea in such a manner might seem daunting, even absurd. The heavy woolen garments, the awkward descent down a rope ladder, the bracing shock of cold water, all these elements combined to create an experience that was as much about overcoming fear as it was about physical refreshment. Yet for others, the very strangeness of the ritual might hold a certain appeal, the chance to participate in a tradition that connected generations, to test one's mettle against the elements, and to emerge from the water with a sense of accomplishment and renewal. The question of whether you would try the Victorian bathing machine is also a question about the nature of history itself. What do we make of the customs and inventions of the past? Do we dismiss them as relics of a more repressive time? Or do we recognize in them the creativity and resilience of people who sought to balance the demands of society with the longing for freedom and pleasure? The bathing machine, in all its peculiarity, stands as a testament to the ingenuity with which individuals have navigated the boundaries of their world. Reflecting on the story of Eleanor and her seaside adventure, one might find echoes of the same questions in contemporary life. How do we negotiate the tension between public expectation and private desire? What rituals and technologies do we invent to manage our anxieties and aspirations? In what ways do we seek out experiences that challenge us, transform us, and connect us to something larger than ourselves? The legacy of the Victorian bathing machine endures not only in the faded photographs and weathered remnants that occasionally surface along the British coast, but in the very idea that history is made up of countless small acts of courage, curiosity, and adaptation. To step into a bathing machine was to step into the unknown, to trust in the ingenuity of others, and to discover, if only for a moment, a new way of being in the world. So, would you try it? Would you leave behind the safety of the shore, submit to the rituals of preparation, and surrender yourself to the cold embrace of the sea? The answer perhaps says as much about the present as it does about the past, revealing the enduring human desire to explore, to transform, and to find meaning in the ordinary and the extraordinary alike.